It was early morning on Friday the 25th of January 2019 when 29-year-old Elizabeth Newell Barraza, known as Liz to everyone, was setting up a garage sale on her driveway in Tomball, Texas, a city just outside of Houston. She was ready to go for the day, she'd already popped to Starbucks for a coffee, and was just hoping to make a bit of money with the garage sale. But then, just before 7 a.m, a car pulls up and someone gets out. They walk up to Liz and shoot her 4 times in total. The next day, she would sadly be pronounced dead in the hospital. This is a crime that has baffled everyone since the day it happened. Investigators believe that whoever killed Liz was paid to do so. But there's no known motive here. She was just your regular 29-year-old woman. She wasn't involved in anything dodgy. Investigators have tried hard to find somebody who even just had something negative to say about her, and that person just doesn't exist. They haven't been able to find anyone with anything bad to say about Liz at all. It really is a cliche in true crime to talk about how incredible people were, how they were loved by everyone, but that is genuinely the case here. Investigators have tried to find someone with something bad to say about Liz Barraza, but that person just doesn't seem to exist. But they must do if this is indeed part of a murder for hire plot like they think it is. This case happened in 2019 and everyone thought it was going to be an easy solve, just an open and shut case. But it soon became clear that that wasn't the case. There has never been any evidence here, never been any real suspects. There's no motive, and without a motive, it makes it really hard to narrow down who could be responsible. When it became clear that investigators weren't going to be able to solve Liz's case alone, her family opened it up to the public. They asked podcasters and YouTubers to share her case, to talk about her story, spread the word as far as possible, because someone out there knows what happened here and that person needs to be reached. Quick side note before we go any further with the story, you can probably already hear I have a cold because of course I always have colds, just constantly, so hopefully that's not too distracting. I feel generally okay, but tell that to my sinuses. So let's talk a bit about Liz Barraza. She was born on June 29th, 1989 in Illinois to her parents Robert Jr. and Rosemary Newell. She also had an older brother, Robert Newell III. Throughout her entire life, Liz was the kind of person who, when she loved something, she really loved it. She was a super passionate person. When she was a kid, she read the Harry Potter books for the first time and just absolutely adored them. And from there, she was just always reading the books. She was always listening to the audiobooks, always watching the films. Like, she was just all in on Harry Potter. And she was just generally a bit of a fantasy nerd, it seems. She also absolutely loves Star Wars and just anything in that general realm. And as someone who was also a self-professed nerd, I call her that with just all the love in the world. My favourite kind of people to be around are nerdy people. People with passions and interests, just fun things to share and talk about. Liz just loved fantasy and the world she could escape to through these books and movies. After Liz graduated in 2008, she headed to Stephen F. Austin State University in Texas, before then transferring to Sam Houston State University, which is where she met Sergio Barraza, the man who would one day become her husband. Whilst the couple was still in college, they actually adopted their puppy, a dachshund named Diesel, and then Liz graduated in 2012 with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Just a couple of years later, on the 1st of February 2014, Liz and Sergio got married. Liz worked as a data reporter while Sergio worked his father's company installing flooring. They saved up loads of money and in 2016 they actually bought their house, 8600 Cedar Oak Drive in the Princeton Place neighbourhood in Tomball, about 30 miles outside of Houston. This was a pretty big house for the two of them. It was in a middle-class neighbourhood, not a super expensive area, but it was nice enough. Like, it wasn't the kind of place where crime really happened. By all accounts, the couple were just really happy. There's never been anything uncovered to suggest that there were any problems at all in their marriage. Neither of them were cheating, they both had good jobs and good incomes. There were no big stresses in their life, and also just didn't even seem like they fought. It was just an all-round really happy marriage. People who knew them have said they didn't even moan to outside people about their partner, like so many people do. Sometimes when people have a gripe, they vent to their friends or they make passing comments to their co-workers about stuff going on at home. Neither of them ever moaned about anything, they just really seemed to love each other. They were happy and they shared a lot of the same interests, like Sergio was just as nerdy as Liz. Together they would attend Comic Cons, comic book conventions, where they would cosplay as their favourite fantasy characters. And it seems like Liz was actually quite creative and really good with a sewing machine. She would make all their own costumes and she spent like a lot of time on them. She really loved doing this. They also often went to the Texas Renaissance Festival in costumes that they made themselves. They just really loved to dress up together. And when you find somebody on that same kind of nerd level as you, on your same wavelength, you hold on to them, and it seems like Liz and Sergio really did have so much fun together. To top it all off, the couple were also members of something called the 501st Legion. I'd never heard of it before, but their website says the 501st Legion is an international costume organisation dedicated to celebrating Star Wars through the creation and use of quality costumes that portray the villainous, morally ambiguous, or non-partisan characters from the Star Wars universe. The Legion promotes interest in Star Wars and facilitates the use of these costumes for Star Wars related events, as well as contributes to the local community through costume charity and volunteer work. The Legion have 3 goals: to promote interest in Star Wars, to facilitate the use of costumes, and to contribute. They want to put their resources to good use through fundraising, charity work, volunteering. Which just makes perfect sense for who Liz was as a person, because she was known to be an incredibly giving person. She dedicated her whole life to just helping others, to serving others, as her parents say. She would drop everything to help somebody in need. Again, we go back to what I was saying earlier about nobody having a single bad word to say about Liz, but it does go further than that. Not only did anybody not have anything bad to say about her, people would actually rave about how wonderful she was, how willing to help she was, how she really would do anything for anyone. She was just an absolute ray of sunshine who dedicated her life to serving others. I mean, through her local 501st Legion, she even paired up with Make-A-Wish Foundation and would go and visit the local hospitals where she would dress up as Star Wars characters, mostly stormtroopers, and would go and visit the children in the children's ward. Like, who does that? Liz does that, of course she does. And so we come around to the 25th of January 2019, the day that's baffled friends, family, investigators ever since. Liz had decided rather last minute that morning she was going to hold a garage sale, as she had the day off work. Some sources say it was a book day off, others say she called in sick that morning. I don't know which one it was. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. Her and Sergio were leaving on the Sunday for a trip to Orlando, Florida, where they were super excited to go and visit the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Universal Studios. Liz was all packed, she was ready to go, and she was so unbelievably excited. But she knew they could do with a bit more cash for souvenirs, hence the garage sale. Garage sales aren't actually much of a thing here in the UK, or at least I've never really seen one. We tend to have car boot sales instead. People just stuff everything they want to sell into their cars. They drive to a field with lots of other people, pop open the boot, pop up tables, and just sell everything from there. It looks like garage sales, the US's answer to our car boot sales. However, usually garage sales are planned a little bit more in advance than Liz's was that day, because you need to advertise, right? Like, you can't just depend on people walking or driving past and stopping, especially in a neighbourhood like this one with fairly little footfall. Usually you'd put up some signs, you'd share on social media, you'd let your friends and family know that you're holding a sale. But because it seems like Liz only decided to hold this sale the night before, she hadn't really had a chance to do this. And this is important because she didn't really have a chance to let people know that this is what she was going to be doing that morning. 7 a.m. on a Friday morning, she usually would have been on her way to work, not setting up a sale on her driveway. Her and Sergio did put out a few signs late the night before, but that was kind of it, and this advertised the sale as being ongoing from Friday through to Saturday, so it was going to be 2 days long. Whilst Liz did decide to hold this sale the last minute, Sergio didn't decide to take the day off to do it with her. He went to work as normal that morning. I kind of get the idea that Liz was just one of those people, kind of like myself, that once she decides she's going to do something, she's going to do it and no one is going to stop her. She is just a one-track mind determination. So she decided she was going to hold this garage sale on her own, even though her husband did have to go to work. So the timeline of their morning went as follows. At 6:08 a.m, Liz drove to her local Starbucks for a coffee. When she got back at 6:16 a.m, her and Sergio began arranging the items on the driveway ready for sale. This takes about half an hour until Sergio leaves to go to work at 6:48 a.m. All seems well and good, there's no issues. It's probably important to note that Liz herself would usually have also left for work by this point as well, and this Friday morning was a complete change up from her usual routine. If someone was looking for her specifically in her usual spot on a Friday just before 7 a.m, they would have found her in her car on her way to work, not setting up a sale in her driveway. Just minutes after Sergio leaves at 6:51 a.m, a truck, a Nissan Frontier, starts to drive up the road towards the Barraza's home. It drives past the house before doing a 3-point turn and coming to park behind Liz's car. Someone exits the car and walks towards the driveway where Liz is still setting everything up. On surveillance footage recovered from the neighbours and the couple's own doorbell camera, you can hear Liz greet this person with a good morning. It's really heart-wrenching hearing this footage. She sounds so happy greeting this person, so polite. Of course, people have analysed this footage a lot over the years, and the general consensus seems to be that whoever this was, Liz didn't seem to recognise them. It seemed like she was greeting a stranger, somebody who had maybe come to browse a sale, and not somebody that she knew and was friendly with. I mean, if you knew someone, you'd generally be like, oh hey, or like, oh nice to see you, like how are you doing, like a lot more chill. Something along those lines. The good morning that she gave this person seemed to be a lot more formal. Of course, this could be incorrect, but just generally that is how people greet others. After this greeting, Liz and this mysterious person would speak for about 6 seconds, conversation which is completely illegible. And then there are 3 quick gunshots in succession. Shot in the chest, Liz collapses onto the driveway, and then the person leans over her and shoots her once more directly in the head. All of this from the person leaving the car happens within just 30 seconds, and then the murderer sprints back to their truck and leaves, speeding away. Sergio left at 6:48 a.m. By 6:53 a.m, she'd been shot, bleeding out on the driveway. But miraculously, she was still alive, just about. Neighbours, just getting up and ready for the day, heard these gunshots, and 3 of them all called 911 to report it. One neighbour from across the street reported on the call that they saw the car leave, and then they saw them inexplicably return to the scene whilst he was on the phone to the operator. And all of this is captured on a camera from one of the neighbours' houses. Another neighbour reported the gunshots as 3 gunshots, rapid fire, then they wait a second or 2, and then another gunshot. By 6:58 a.m, just 10 minutes after Sergio left for work, Harris County Police Constables arrive at the scene and they secure it. An undisclosed amount of time later, the ambulance arrive and they call for Life Flight, which is the air ambulance service. At 7:21 a.m, Liz is transported to Memorial Hermann Hospital, which was the same hospital that she volunteered at, and her parents arrived at the scene at the house just minutes later. Basically, when the constables entered the home to secure it, they set off the alarm that Liz had set to trigger if a door was opened, if there was an intruder. She took care to look after herself when she was home alone, and this still happened. When the alarm company couldn't reach Liz, they automatically contacted her parents, who immediately headed to the house just to check everything was okay. And I don't think they would ever have imagined just how not okay things were. Within just a couple of minutes, Sergio also arrived back home after having been notified, and he was immediately detained for questioning. Of course, in cases like this, the murder of a woman, the husband or boyfriend or partner, is always looked at first. It is a sad fact that a huge amount of female homicide victims are killed by their domestic partners. According to the Bureau of Justice statistics with numbers from 2021 from the USA, of the estimated 4,970 female victims of murder and non-negligent manslaughter, 34% were killed by an intimate partner, and overall 76% of female murders and 56% of male murders were perpetrated by somebody known to the victim. So as much as it does hurt, it is correct for law enforcement to look at those closest to the victims first. When she arrived at the hospital, Liz was taken directly to the shock trauma ICU, where she was put on life support whilst doctors conducted tests to see exactly where she was at. Her parents, brother and sister-in-law all made it to the hospital, while Sergio and his mum would make it that afternoon. It seems it was clear to everyone on that Friday just how severe Liz's condition was, as Sergio and Bob, her dad, spoke with Life Gift about organ donation options, and a donation was set up on that day. This does suggest to me that the test showed no brain activity on the Friday. Her body was being kept alive by the life support, but there was little to no chance of her coming around, and it seems like everyone knew that by the Friday. On Saturday the 26th, the trauma team administered a final round of neurological exams just to make sure there were definitely no signs of life, and then Liz was taken off of life support. At 1:40 p.m, surrounded by all of those who loved her the most, Liz was pronounced dead by the trauma team, and they made preparations for her to donate her organs. Her body was kept going by machines until the Tuesday, when she was officially taken down for donations. Even after her death, Liz Barraza was still making a difference to people's lives, still helping in any way she could. She donated her heart, her liver, both kidneys, and her corneas. Her 4 organ recipients had spent a total of 8,144 days on the transplant list, and her death finally gave them their chances at life, and Liz wouldn't have wanted anything less. After this, her remains were cremated. On the 1st of February, so the Friday after her death, her friends and family held a vigil at her home to call for justice and raise as much publicity as they could, and they even invited the local media over to cover it. People who knew Liz from all walks of life gathered in the Barraza's front yard, where she had been shot just 1 week earlier, and raised toy wands and lightsabers into the air in her honour, which is just such a beautiful tribute to Liz, because you just know that she would have absolutely loved that. She was really seen in that moment by the people who loved her, like they knew what she would like and they did it. Her dad said at the vigil, "My daughter Liz spent her life healing and spreading love and cheer to all of those around her, even total strangers." They also sold t-shirts at the vigil that read, "Justice for Liz, may the force be with you always." Again, just a wonderful tribute with references to her beloved Harry Potter and Star Wars. Around this same time, the family also set up a GoFundMe to raise money for a reward, in the hopes that this would help them find the killer. Because already at this point in the investigation, it was becoming abundantly clear that this was going to be an uphill battle. There were no obvious answers. Just days after the murder, Houston Crime Stoppers would announce their own reward of $20,000 for any information leading to the arrest of the killer, but Liz's family wanted to add to it. They wanted to do more. The agency in charge of this investigation was the Harris County Sheriff's Office, and in that first week, they looked at all of those closest to Liz. They questioned everyone. They theorised in those early days this must have been somebody who either knew Liz or Sergio. The whole scenario seemed to be incredibly deliberate. Homicide detective Michael Ritchie would say it was very quick, it was very calculated, very cold-blooded in how it was done. I do believe that more than one person was involved in this, and I do believe that there are some people out there that maybe have a suspicion that somebody they know might have been involved in this. But there was just no motive. As I've already said, they couldn't find a single person who even had a bad word to say about Liz, let alone want to hurt her, to kill her. So they focused on the information they did have, what they could tell from the scene, and importantly, what they could tell from the CCTV footage from the neighbouring houses. First up, they had the fact that no shell casings were found at the crime scene, which narrowed down the type of gun used by the murderer as being a revolver. Okay, that is helpful, but that's it. That's all they had. With no shell casings, there was no testing they could do, there was no DNA, no hair, nothing left at the scene by the assailant, at least as far as the authorities have let the public know. And the footage from the neighbours didn't capture the assailant's face, although it did show them to be wearing a very odd outfit. This person seemed to be dressed in all white and some sort of long cloak, and when they sprinted back to the car, back to the truck after shooting Liz, it seemed to kind of fan out behind them. Of course, whilst there is footage of all this, it is not good quality and it's from quite far away, so details aren't really very clear. But to me at least, it definitely seems that it is some kind of white cloak, something long and flowy. I've seen some speculation that it might be in some sort of white dressing gown, and honestly, I can see that. I might agree with that. It also could have been a light trench coat or just a long floaty dress. Because of these details, many people have speculated over the years that the assailant might have actually been a female. And that's also been supported by the fact that in the footage, it really doesn't seem like this person was that much taller than Liz. Liz was short herself, she was just 5'2", and the killer only seemed to be a few inches taller than that, maybe around 5'5", 5'6". Of course, it is more than possible for a man to be around this height, but it is on the shorter side for a male, whereas average height for a woman seems to be around 5'4" to 5'6", depending on which area of the world you're looking at. I say that because the average height for a Latino man is around 5'6" though, and this is an area in Texas with a very high Latin population, so it is worth bearing in mind that whilst maybe white men might be slightly taller, Latino men might be slightly shorter, and that could work. And I got that information online, so don't shout at me if it's wrong, but multiple sources online seem to back that up, so yeah. But it's not just the height, it is also the choice of dress that makes people think it's a female rather than a male. This long dress-like item and the fact they also appear to have long hair, although it could of course have been a wig. If somebody was actually going out to commit this crime, they would have worn some sort of disguise, I'm sure. If this was a female perpetrator, it certainly is a very interesting and unusual case. I found an article on the Washington Post by Dan Keating entitled "The Weapons Men and Women Most Often Use to Kill," and although this article is from 2015, I think some of the data in it probably still stands. It was a super interesting read. It states that men commit about 90% of murders with guns as their weapon of choice 2/3 of the time. Women only commit about 10% of murders and they use guns less than half the time. Of course, remember we are talking US data here because Liz's case does come from the USA, so it is relevant. After guns, women are most likely to use a knife, to beat their victim to death, to use a blunt object, and then it's often quoted that women are much more likely to use poison. But that is actually only the 6th most common way for a woman to commit murder. But it is still more commonly used by women than by men though. Not really relevant, just found that interesting. So male or female killer in the USA, they're both fairly likely to use a gun as their weapon of choice. But statistically, a male is going to be the killer 90% of the time. Could Liz's case be the exception to that rule? And of course, if that is so, it opens up the suspect list to a whole new population. It has also been suspected that this might have been a male purposefully trying to appear more feminine, knowing that they may well be appearing on cameras, especially if maybe they'd cased the area beforehand. As I've already alluded to, investigators have pondered on the idea that this could have been a murder for hire plot. I did try to do some research about how many hitmen are actually women, hit women. Shockingly, the information isn't really easily accessible, so I don't really know. But perhaps if you were paying somebody to kill another, is it smarter to choose a woman to do so? Are they less likely to be a suspect? I don't really know, but what does seem to be clear though is this person was familiar with a gun. In the footage they seem to be calm and collected. They're gripping the gun with their right hand and shooting it with no hesitation, no shock at the recoil. It seemed casual, cool, like this is something they might have done often. Or was it something that just simply didn't bother them? I mean, if you handed me a gun and told me to shoot it, I would have no idea where to begin. But I do understand that people in the USA generally are a bit more familiar with guns. I don't know, to me it just really seemed like this person knew what they were doing, they had a goal, they achieved it, they just did it. Next I want to talk about the truck a little bit and the movements of said truck because they are undeniably very strange. The assailant turned up at the scene in a dark Nissan Frontier Pro 4X. Police were able to zoom in on the security footage and identify this for sure. Specifically, they believe that it was a 2013 model with 4 doors, and this is a type of car that wouldn't have been all that common in Texas at this time, so it likely would have stood out a little bit amongst all the other really sort of familiar cars. But despite all the investigation over the years, they have never been able to trace it, or at least if they have, they've never publicly announced that they found it. The first evidence we have of this Nissan comes at 6:47 a.m, when it's captured on security footage pulling into Princeton Place Drive and then driving into the Goddard School parking lot. There is some evidence that this car was seen in the area the night before, potentially casing it out, but it's very unclear if that information is correct, so don't count on that. Less than 1 minute after entering the school parking lot, the Nissan then leaves and drives on to a different street before appearing back on the Barraza's road at 6:51 a.m, driving towards the house. As I detailed earlier, it drives past their house, does a 3-point turn, and then parks behind Liz's car, and the killer exits. After the shooting, they sprinted right back to it in what some have described as a feminine gait, and then they sped away at 6:53 a.m. At 6:55 a.m, the car exits Princeton Place and then does a U-turn to re-enter the neighbourhood. Just seconds later, the Barraza's doorbell cam captures it driving back past the house. And this is a point that's always baffled people, because why turn back? Why risk getting caught? To me, there are 2 possible things you could deduce from this. Either the assailant regretted their actions and turned around, maybe hoping that Liz had got up and moved, that help was already there, or maybe they were ensuring that they had done the job, that Liz was definitely dead, or at least still down. Sergeant Michael Ritchie said to People magazine that he feels the person contacted someone and said, "Hey, the job's been done," and then the other person said, "Are you sure?" So the assailant turned around and drove by the scene one more time. Only after this apparent checking does the truck leave the area. It's tracked on several commercial cameras in the early morning, but eventually enters an area with no camera coverage and just disappears, lost forever. With so much footage, you would find yourself wondering how they haven't been able to deduce the number plate, but apparently they just haven't. Or maybe the number plate was covered, maybe it was a false one, I don't know. But as far as we're aware, they've never been able to actually find the number plate, find the car. For months after the shooting, they searched high and low for the Nissan. They even got the Texas Rangers involved, but nothing ever came up. The truck really did just vanish. The investigation in this case reached a dead end quite quickly, with no motive to follow through on. Liz's dad told People, "You feel like something extraordinarily evil reached out and intentionally murdered my daughter. This was not a robbery, this was not a gang initiation. This was somebody that wanted to kill my daughter and did it. That's crazy. It's just unimaginable." I can imagine it's maybe easier in a way to deal with a murder when there seems to be some kind of motive behind it, when you know why someone killed another person, as warped as that motive may be. But not knowing why, it must eat you up every single day. In August 2019, so 9 months on, reports of there being a warrant came out, the results of which would apparently be huge to the case, but news around this was kept quite quiet. In January 2020, according to ABC 13, Officer Ritchie did hint there was something coming down the pike and referenced there being a warrant out in this case. I assume it's the same warrant from August 2019. He said, "I feel that the results of this warrant will be critical in the investigation and most likely will expose a suspect who's responsible for this." However, it is now May 2024 and I couldn't find any further news on this. I don't know if it just didn't come to anything, or perhaps COVID severely slowed things down. Shortly after this point, of course, the whole world would come to a standstill, including many police investigations. As with many cases I've just so happened to cover recently, I do suspect this is one where police are keeping their cards very close to their chests. In all my research, I couldn't help but feel that, reading between the lines, authorities here maybe do know more than they've let on. Sometimes they do hold back certain information to really trap a suspect with once they've got them in custody. It's not always worth sharing every detail with the public, especially when it's not necessarily something that could help with the tip coming in. As Sergio said to ABC 13 just a few months ago in December 2023, I hope police just have something they're holding on to and getting ready to snap their jaws around it. At first, the police only released the neighbours' footage to the public, the far view of the car pulling up and the suspect approaching Liz. But in January 2021, so 2 years after her death, they finally released the doorbell camera footage from the Barrazas' home. Now, in this footage, you can't really see much. The view of the driveway is mostly blocked by the porch. You do see the car drive past the house, and then you can see something moving, presumably the person approaching Liz, but it's very low quality, and the full view is blocked by a treadmill that Liz is apparently trying to sell. And then the camera starts to pick up some audio, but obviously, as they were so far away, you can't really hear anything at all. You can very, very, very vaguely hear Liz saying good morning, but after that, I've got nothing for you. People have tried to enhance the audio over the following years. There are all sorts of interpretations of the very short conversation that followed, but honestly, I can't hear anything at all. Even the good morning, I can barely hear. I am almost deaf in one ear though, so generally I can't hear anything at all. You might be able to pick up on more. I am going to play the clip here for you. In the original version, you can hear the gunshots and you can hear Liz scream, but I've cut that out because I don't think any of us need to hear that. I wish I hadn't, it's very harrowing, but just try and listen to the audio. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you have any interpretation of anything that was said there. Like I said, I can't hear anything at all, but generally I can't hear anything at all, so that means nothing. As of interviews with Liz's dad from January of this year, so 2024, it seems they are still working under the assumption that this was a murder for hire plot, or at least the family are still working under that assumption. I assume they're still in contact with the police, but they're probably not privy to every detail of the investigation. Bob, her dad, said, "No, it's not a random thing. The person who shot her, we believe, was paid to shoot her. That makes this case ever so much difficult to deal with because we have maybe two parties and we don't currently have the names or addresses of either of them. There's no such thing as a perfect murder." Now, if Bob is correct, he's saying there are two parties involved here. So the person who hired the killer and the killer themselves. That's two chances for people to incriminate themselves, and that hasn't ever happened so far in this case. And we still have the question of why. Why would somebody pay another person to kill Liz? There is genuinely nothing the authorities have ever been able to dig up on her that suggests she had any enemies, anybody who had anything bad to say about her at all. She was this fantasy nerd who worked with charities and visited sick kids in hospital, for God's sake. What did she do that upset somebody this much? With lack of motive, it's really hard to talk theories because things really are just a stab in the dark. But there are two main trains of thought that I've seen online in discussions about this case. One, that she did something that annoyed somebody in the cosplay or fandom communities that she was a part of which there is literally zero evidence, but it could have been maybe a mentally ill person, somebody who clearly had a very over-the-top reaction to whatever it is that maybe Liz did that pissed them off. I couldn't even take a guess at how she could piss somebody off that much, but crazier things have sadly happened is maybe an option. Number 2 is that Sergio could have been responsible. Now, I want to make it incredibly clear here that Sergio has never been considered a suspect or even a person of interest in this case. There is nothing to suggest that he had anything to do with his wife's murder. But people online do find it interesting that the Nissan seemed to start towards the house at the exact moment that Sergio left home. They arrived at the home just a couple of minutes after he left. Is that just a coincidence? Some people online suggest that maybe he contacted this person to let them know that he was leaving, but I assume all his tech was checked and they didn't find anything. We know that he wasn't responsible for the shooting himself, it simply couldn't have been him. He was in his car on the way to work, I assume captured by cameras on his route. So did he hire somebody to kill his wife? We don't know, there's no motivation for him to have done so. As far as everyone was aware, they were really happily married. It has been pointed out plenty of times over the years that it didn't take Sergio that long to move on. He met the next woman who would go on to marry in the middle of 2020, and he sold the house within the year. But neither of these two things point towards any sort of guilt. It's understandable that this house would maybe hold a lot of trauma, a lot of bad memories for him, and you can't help when you meet somebody new. People deal with grief in all sorts of ways. Maybe his new wife helped him process some things. Online sleuths love to find a theory and just run with it. Like everything Sergio does is analysed by these people online. I saw people saying that he doesn't do enough interviews, that it's suspicious. He does too many interviews, it's suspicious. He's too emotional, he's not emotional. Everything he does is just overly analysed. He's giving too many details, he's not giving enough details. Basically, I don't think anyone has any solid evidence when it comes to Sergio's potential involvement. But he was a husband, he was statistically likely to be involved. Doesn't mean he was, but statistics say that he could have been. I don't know. In lieu of any other suspects, he's the only person people have got to speculate about. But I do think an important theory to bear in mind is that this could have been totally random. This could have been any person, potentially mentally ill, scouring the streets early on a Friday morning, telling themselves that they were going to kill somebody, already with a disguise and a gun. Then they just so happened to come across a lone woman on her driveway before her neighbours were up and about, and they decided that she was going to be their victim. Maybe they spotted her as they drove past, they did a 3-point turn, they pulled their car over, got out and approached her. It seems strange that it would be random, but people are strange. Liz may have been a completely random, completely unlucky victim, targeted just because she was awake, just because she was there. And if this was indeed the case, it makes the killer so much harder to find. I assume they have no DNA, no forensic evidence found at the scene, and if there truly is no connection between her and her killer, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. You've just got to hope that somebody confesses or somebody close to the killer maybe comes forward. I'm not completely ruling out the fact they could have DNA though. I really hope they do, and they're just not sharing that with the public. In December 2023, somebody, it wasn't the police, just somebody, released new dashcam footage from one of the first police cars that arrived at the scene. The footage showed Sergio turning up at the home and learning that Liz had been shot, and it really is quite harrowing to watch, so I don't know if I'm going to include that in this actual video. We'll see. As of January this year, the FBI and the Texas Rangers have joined the investigation, and the Harris County Sheriff's Office have said that no one has been ruled out as a suspect. They haven't got any suspects, but no one has been ruled out as one. 5 years on, Liz's family run a website, whokilledlizbarraza.com, where they put all the latest updates about this case. They are so unbelievably dedicated to finding justice for their daughter. The current reward fund for any information that leads to an arrest in this case has been increased to $50,000, but despite this incredible amount of money, no one has ever come forward. There's never been a single arrest in this case, and as far as we're aware, there's never been a single suspect either. This reward was raised through crowdfunding by Liz's parents. Bob said that they made the decision to increase the reward in hopes to move the investigation forward, but it didn't really work. As I said at the beginning of this episode, they are trying to use social media to spread the word of this case. They reached out to a number of podcasters, to YouTubers and TikTokers in the hopes that people would talk about Liz, that somebody out there knows something. So if you know of any content creators who make true crime content, please contact them and ask them to talk about Liz Barraza. I wish somebody had contacted me and asked me to share about this case years ago, because I would have done so. They are desperate for people to talk about this case, to get the facts out there, and hopefully eventually contact somebody who might know something. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, if you've been able to put up with my very nasally cold voice all the way through to the end, please make sure you show your appreciation by leaving a comment down below, by giving it a thumbs up, just interacting with this video in any way that you can. It just tells YouTube and the algorithm that you like my content and maybe you'd like to see more of it. Or if you're feeling particularly generous, you can join my channel memberships for just £2.99 a month. That gives you early access to videos and just a direct way to chat with me, join the little community, and you also get priority video requests as well. So if there's a video that you want me to cover, if there's a case that you want me to cover in a video, then becoming a channel member is a really great way to enable me to see that. My channel members are one of the biggest reasons to why I'm able to continue making this content. So really, to my channel members, can't appreciate you enough. You are incredible. If you'd like to join, then I also really appreciate you. That'd be great. If you can't afford it, that's totally fine. Just interact with this video and I still love you anyway. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.